Danica, we're moving in a different direction, and frankly, I don't think you fit in that picture anymore.
He said it like he was commenting on a spreadsheet, not ending someone's career. I'd been with Helixotech for 17 years. It took less than 6 months under the new CEO to feel like a stranger in my own office. 17 years is a long time to call a place your second home, long enough to remember when our break room had a dented microwave that gave off sparks, when we celebrated every small win with homemade cupcakes, and when birthdays came with handwritten cards passed around the office. I was there before Helixotech had color-coded departments or multi-tiered org charts, before we had culture consultants or monthly engagement surveys, back when the CEO knew everyone's kids' names. We were a family then, imperfect, but warm. Then came Jonas Keene. He swept in with his polished shoes, buzzword-heavy vocabulary, and a grin that didn't quite touch his eyes. 36, fresh out of a high-growth startup in Manhattan. The announcement called him a visionary change agent. What we got was a corporate wrecking ball in designer clothing. In his first town hall, he told us he wanted to infuse agility and modernize legacy thinking. He said our company needed to be re-architected from the ground up. I remember glancing across the room and seeing my coworkers nod. Some looked hopeful, a few looked scared. I just felt cold. Within weeks, the warmth began to disappear. Jerry from accounting was transitioned out after 19 years. Martha from facilities was replaced by an outsourced service contract. Carla, our most meticulous compliance manager, was nudged into early retirement with a half-hearted thank you email. I kept waiting for the conversation that would come for me, but it never did. Instead, one Friday afternoon, I returned from lunch to find my belongings boxed. My framed photo, the ficus I'd nurtured since 2011, my ergonomic keyboard. Sitting neatly on top was a note from Tina Mullins, Jonas's new assistant. Hi Danica. We've done a little reshuffle to maximize collaboration. Your new workspace is at Desk 3B near the refreshment area. Thanks for being flexible. Desk 3B was a former storage nook. It smelled like old coffee grounds and microwave popcorn. There was no window, no drawers. My old nameplate had been tossed. In its place was a laminated sign, temporary workstation. I stared at it for a long time. The following week, I noticed subtle changes. My access to the shared HR folder was restricted. Files I had built over years were suddenly archived. Meeting invites stopped coming. When I checked in with IT, they said it must be a permission sync. Tina assured me it was just a little optimization. Her smile was tight, her eyes dismissive. Then came Team Culture Fridays. It started as a quirky initiative theme days, casual wear, lunch parties, but quickly, it became performance. Retro Y2K, Mimi Monday, Silent Disco Thursday. There were leaderboards, Slack shoutouts, and hashtags like Vibe Check Champion. Everyone was expected to participate or risk looking unengaged. I didn't own neon leggings or ironic band tees. I didn't TikTok. I came to work to do my job, help people, solve problems, guide new hires. That Friday, Tina passed by my desk wearing butterfly clips and a glitter choker. Danica, you didn't join the dance relay. Want me to record your bit later? I looked up. No, thank you. You sure? Jonas is really big on team visibility. Her tone was sugar, but it scraped like glass. The next Monday, a company-wide email listed the week's culture champions. My name wasn't there. Again, I passed by the conference room and saw Jonas holding court, gesturing to slides labeled Next Gen Vision. The room was filled with shiny new hires, laughing, taking notes. My chair in the corner remained empty. I hadn't been invited. Later that day, I caught a snippet of Tina's voice in the hallway. She's nice, she said, but slow, sentimental. Honestly, she's just tired. I wasn't tired. I was furious. But I smiled, as I always did, and returned to my little corner. I opened the HR dashboard. 2 permissions denied. 3 employee files missing. The wellness initiative I started, archived. The mentoring program I ran, discontinued. No one told me. I thought about the exit interviews I used to conduct. How many employees left because they felt invisible? Now I understood. At 6:13 p.m., the office was nearly empty. I sat in silence, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I opened my drawer. There was my old Helixotech mug chipped, stained, still mine. I ran my thumb along the rim. 17 years. I'd helped build this place, stayed through budget cuts, board overhauls, acquisitions, trained half the people still working here. And now, a temporary label, a shrinking inbox, a smiley face telling me to be flexible. I looked down at the badge on my desk, floating assignment. Danica G, no title, no team, just floating. The fridge behind me buzzed. The overhead lights flickered. My screen showed an empty calendar. I'd gone from being the soul of HR to a ghost in my own department. I rose slowly, gathered my coat still on the same hook it had hung from for years, and stepped into the hallway. I didn't know it yet, but they'd already marked my name for deletion. It's just a theme day. Danica. Tina smirked. Loosen up. It's all about good vibes now. It was Friday morning, and the office was a sea of sequins, synthetic wigs, and aggressively bright colors. Today's theme was Y2K throwback, and as I walked past rows of desks lit by neon desk lamps and ring lights, I felt like I'd wandered into a costume party no one invited me to. Someone was blasting Oops. I did it again from a Bluetooth speaker in marketing. A group of developers were filming a TikTok dance by the stairwell. Even the front desk receptionist had glitter in her hair, and a crop top that said, I, the 90s. And me, I wore the same slate grey slacks and cardigan I always wore on Fridays. Not out of protest, but because I had a full day of back-to-back check-ins, documentation deadlines, and one final onboarding to process before month's end. But those things didn't matter anymore, not here. Not now, not under Jonas. A pop-up appeared on my screen at 10:04 a.m. Team culture, Friday check-in, mandatory attendance. Location, open collab space-time. 10:15 a.m. I sighed. 15 minutes later, I stood awkwardly between a guy wearing oversized denim and a woman in glitter platform heels. Everyone clapped as Jonas entered the space, wearing frosted tips and shutter shades. Look at this squad, he grinned. This is what culture looks like. Not just productivity, but personality. Tina held a ring light and recorded everything. Then came the shout-outs. Culture leaders of the week. Best outfit, most creative throwback. No mention of effort, no recognition of teamwork. Then Jonas turned to the group. Okay, for the final round, we're doing a Guess That Meme challenge. Danica, come up here. I froze. Every head turned. Come on, Danica, Tina called out. It's just for fun. I took a breath and stepped up. They projected a grainy photo of a cat on a keyboard. I stared blankly at it. Someone in the back laughed. It's Keyboard Cat. You've never seen that? No, I said quietly. The silence was louder than the music had been. When I returned to my seat, the energy around me shifted. No one spoke. They just turned back to their phones or danced or filmed something new. By lunchtime, I decided to skip the pizza party. I went to the small cafe across the street instead, one that still remembered my name and how I liked my coffee. I sat in the corner booth and stared out at the parking lot, wondering if I was the one who had changed, or if the place I loved had been gutted while I was too busy following policy to notice. When I returned to my desk, a new notification flashed across my screen. Pauline Torres, HR Disciplinary Meeting 3:00 p.m. Pauline had joined 2 months ago. Young, bright, a bit shy. She asked a lot of good questions and actually read the employee handbook, which was rare. I had taken a liking to her, even if she was a bit too earnest for the sarcasm-slicked culture around her. I messaged her immediately. Just saw your invite. Everything okay? She didn't reply. At 2:58, I saw her walking slowly toward the glass meeting room. Her hair was in a low bun, and she was clutching a small notebook like it was armor. She glanced around like she didn't want to be seen. I stood up and followed. When I entered the room, Tina was already seated, typing away on her tablet. Jonas sat across the table with his usual easy confidence, legs crossed, phone in hand. I sat beside Pauline, who looked like she hadn't slept. Let's get to it. Jonas began. There have been concerns about Pauline's culture fit, specifically her reluctance to participate in Friday activities, her lack of social engagement, and some negative feedback from peers about her energy. I looked at Pauline, then back at Jonas. She's been here 8 weeks. She's hit every deadline. She stayed late last Tuesday to help finish the quarterly draft. She's the only one who filled out the new ethics module voluntarily. Jonas shrugged. All true, but you know as well as I do, Danica's skills are only half the package now, Tina added, and it sends the wrong message to others when someone doesn't join in. Optics matter. Pauline's voice trembled, and I didn't know, not joining a dance meant I was getting written up. Jonas turned to me. We'll need HR to process the formal documentation. Danica, can you prep the file for signature? I felt the room spin for a second. You want me to draft her warning? I asked. He smiled. You're HR, aren't you? There it was, that word again. HR, no name, no face, just a tool to enforce whatever version of culture they deemed worthy that week. I nodded, slow and cold. The meeting ended, and Pauline walked out with her head low. I returned to my desk and opened her file. The cursor blinked on the disciplinary template. It felt wrong, every part of it. Every keystroke I typed was a betrayal, not just of her, but of who I used to be here. The one who fought for fairness, for clarity, for giving people a chance. I closed the file without saving. At 4:12 p.m., I stepped into the hallway to get some air. Pauline was sitting on the bench outside the building, staring at the sidewalk like it had answers. I sat beside her. She didn't look up. They want me out. I stayed quiet. And they want you to do it. I looked into her eyes and saw something I hadn't seen in months, an ally. When I opened that HR folder, I wasn't expecting to see Pauline's name, let alone the directive stamped across it in bold red. Terminate. Monday morning came with the same crisp air and burnt coffee scent, but something was off. My inbox had been suspiciously empty all weekend. No follow-up from Jonas or Tina. Normally, after a disciplinary meeting like Fridays, there'd be a formal packet, system notes, confirmation that I'd logged the interaction, but there was nothing. I decided to dig. Our HR system had a tiered access level. Mine had been gradually whittled down over the past few weeks, but there were still backdoors places where legacy folders hadn't yet been migrated. I knew them because I built them. I navigated through a string of shared directories from our pre-merger days, clicking slowly, carefully. Most files were inert old org charts, templates, archived policies. But then I spotted something strange. A folder labeled Align Phase R3, buried deep in a renamed subfolder. It wasn't standard naming. I opened it. Inside were PDFs with names I recognized. Pauline Torres, Jeremy Lin, Dana Marston, all employees who had either recently left or, in Pauline's case, had just been flagged. I clicked on Pauline's. There it was, an unsigned termination notice with her name, her employee ID, and the words, "Not aligned with culture and contract prior to 90-day mark." Dated 2 days before our meeting. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't disciplinary at all. It was a hit list, a pre-written decision masked as a culture issue. They never intended to give her a chance. The whole meeting was a performance. And worse, it wasn't just her. I clicked on Dana's file. Similar phrasing. Resistance to rebranding efforts. Terminated after 64 days. I checked Jeremy's. Low visibility engagement. They were targeting anyone who didn't cheer loud enough. My hands shook as I opened a fourth file. This one wasn't for a new hire. It had my name on it. Danica Greer. Projected removal. 3-5 weeks. Narrative. Position redundant due to AI-driven automation. Recommend graceful exit via reorg. I stared at it for a long time. Graceful exit. Redundant. I trained the very system they claimed would replace me. I wrote the ethics protocols still printed in our onboarding packets. I printed the documents slowly, slipping them into a thin manila folder I'd tucked in my bag. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew I couldn't unsee them. I shut the file system, logged out, and stood up. Across the room, Tina was laughing with another assistant. Jonas was on a video call, his back to the glass wall. They looked so sure of themselves, like the story was already written, and I was just a footnote. I walked to the kitchen, needing air more than coffee. At the corner counter, I saw Pauline again. She was pouring hot water over a tea bag, hands trembling just slightly. Rough morning, I asked gently. She looked up, startled, then nodded. I couldn't sleep all weekend. They said they'd review things, that it wasn't final. It felt final. I hesitated. Don't sign anything. Not yet. She tilted her head. Why? Because I think. I glanced around. You're not the only one. That afternoon, I stayed late. After everyone left, I walked to the basement archives back when we still used hard copies. I had clearance. Barely. I flipped through file cabinets labeled Transitions, and deep in drawer C4, I found it, an old whistleblower file from 3 years ago. It had been sealed, a complaint against leadership, never acted on. It included emails about employee targeting, a pattern of removing non-conforming team members, different leaders, same tactics. This wasn't just Jonas's idea, it was culture. All right, rotted from somewhere long before he ever arrived. I scanned everything into a hidden folder on my personal drive. I encrypted the files and backed them up onto a flash drive I kept in my purse. As I turned off my monitor, I noticed a shadow in the hallway. A man in a grey suit paused by the elevator. He looked at me through the glass for just a moment. George Halbert. I hadn't seen the COO in weeks. Some said he was semi-retired. Others said he was being phased out quietly, like the rest of us. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, just once. I returned the gesture, unsure of what it meant, but something in his eyes told me he knew more than he let on. I slipped the flash drive into the inside pocket of my coat and zipped it tight. I tucked the printout into my purse, knowing full well I'd just crossed the line. If you're not with the culture, Danica, maybe this company's outgrown you, Jonas told me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There are some sentences that don't leave bruises on your skin, but they leave scars somewhere much deeper. That one landed like a punch I couldn't block. Jonas delivered it so casually, like he was telling me the vending machine was out of Diet Coke. We were in one of the newer feedback pods, glass-walled rooms lined with soundproof panels and abstract art. The walls were meant to foster psychological safety. Ironic. It felt more like an interrogation chamber with mood lighting. Tina sat to my right, perched like a corporate parrot, tapping on her tablet with polished nails. Jonas reclined in his chair, legs crossed, looking like he had already moved on from me to his next agenda item. Look, you've been part of this company for a long time, and that's something we appreciate. But cultures evolve. Teams evolve. Sometimes people grow in different directions. Different directions. That's what they called it now. Not firing, not pushing out, just a gentle repositioning into obscurity. He continued, we're doing some strategic realignment in HR, automating certain processes, shifting others to shared services. And frankly, Danica, your role, well, it's at risk of becoming obsolete. I folded my hands on the table, because I won't dance for your Friday videos. His smile twitched. Let's not make this personal. Too late. I left the room without another word, my heels clicking louder than usual in the hallway. Every step felt like I was walking out of something I had spent years building and being quietly erased from. Back at my desk, still labeled Temp Floating 3B, I opened the drawer. Beneath a stack of faded sticky notes and a worn-out stress ball was something I hadn't used in years, a pocket recorder. I had kept it from my early days running exit interviews, back when people still spoke freely before lawyers got involved. It still worked. The red light flickered to life when I clicked it on. I tucked it under a folder labeled Q3 Policy Audit and pushed the drawer shut. Tuesday morning, I saw Tina pacing near Jonas's office with a folder in hand. She slipped in without knocking. I waited a beat, grabbed my water bottle, and walked down the hall like I had nothing but hydration on my mind. Their voices bled through the wall, muffled but clear enough. She's not leaving, Tina said. What's she playing at? Jonas sighed. She's stalling, but she's just HR. Who's she going to tell? Tina laughed. She probably still thinks HR is sacred. He added, frame it as restructuring. Use the AI angle. If she resists, we document disengagement. I felt my stomach twist. The way he said disengagement like it was a diagnosis, like being methodical, quiet, and principled had become a corporate disease. Back at my desk, I played back the audio, clear as day. The smugness, the intent, the contempt. It was all there. By Wednesday, I started my own quiet project. I compiled anonymous complaints from Glassdoor, screenshots of Slack messages that hinted at pressure tactics, metrics showing a spike in turnover since Jonas's arrival, especially among women over 40. I found old performance reviews of Pauline with glowing praise, then cross-referenced them with the sudden drop in her engagement rating after she refused to participate in a TikTok challenge. I built a folder titled Helix or Pattern Evidence, in between HR calls and pretend culture syncs. I worked like a ghost. No one noticed. They never noticed the ones they tried to erase. That afternoon, Pauline stopped by my desk. She looked pale, her eyes shadowed. They scheduled another culture fit review for me tomorrow, she said quietly. Same room, same time. You're not going alone, I said. She hesitated. They said I could bring someone from HR, but it's not required. I stood. It is now. She smiled, just slightly. Why are you doing this? I thought for a long second, because I remember what it felt like to think no one was. That night, I stayed late. The floor was dark, except for the glow of my screen and the hum of the vending machine in the corner. I opened the HR drive and pulled the access logs. There it was. Jonas had accessed personnel files outside his scope 3 times. Tina too. No audit trail. No notes. I saved the logs, copied the folder to a flash drive I now wore around my neck. At 8:47 p.m., I saw movement. George Halberd, the COO, stood by the elevator. He wasn't a man you saw often these days. Rumor was he had been pushed out slowly frozen, just like the rest of us. But there he was, watching me through the glass. I met his gaze. He didn't wave, just nodded once. Then he walked on. The next morning, an envelope appeared on my desk. No return address. Inside was a business card. L. Windsor. Legal counsel. External. And a number. On the back, in tiny, careful handwriting. When culture fails, evidence speaks. I held the card between my fingers for a long while. I wasn't just collecting information anymore. I was building a case. Later that afternoon, I added one more file to the folder. A scan of the original Helix Tech values before the rebranding, before the fake team days and forced smiles, back when we believed in fairness, in integrity, in looking after each other. I stared at those words like they were the closing line of a book I once loved. Then I clicked save. I looked into his eyes and saw something I hadn't seen in months. an ally. The termination letter on my desk had my name on it this time. It was printed on thick cream paper, tucked into an official envelope with my full name in block letters. No email, no meeting request. Just a silent bombshell waiting for me at 8:03 a.m. on a Thursday. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I poured myself a cup of bitter office coffee, walked the perimeter of the floor, and nodded politely to people who didn't know or didn't care that this might be my last day. Back at my desk, I peeled open the envelope. Dear Ms. Danica Greer, as part of our ongoing organizational transformation, your position has been impacted by structural realignment. Your last day will be Friday, effective close of business. It was 2 paragraphs long. No emotion, no recognition, not even a signature from Jonas, just a stamped title. Chief Executive Officer. I took a deep breath and reread it. Friday. That was tomorrow. They were giving me a day and a half to pack up 17 years, but they weren't expecting what I had been packing for weeks. I pulled the flash drive from around my neck and inserted it into my computer. The folder labeled Helix or Pattern Evidence opened instantly screenshots, audio recordings, audit logs, anonymous complaints, and a dozen PDFs cross-referencing terminations with Slack sentiment scores and Friday participation. I highlighted everything, zipped it, encrypted it. Then I opened my personal Gmail, addressed a message to the legal contact George had slipped me outside Sir Windsor and attached the file. Subject line, Workplace Retaliation Evidence, Helix or Tech. I paused before hitting send. My heart thudded. I was burning the last of my safety net. Click. Send. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A smooth voice greeted me. Mrs. Greer, this is Lorraine Windsor. I received your file. I'd like to speak immediately, if you're available. We talked for 45 minutes. I spoke quietly, carefully, in clipped tones. She listened, asked a few questions, took notes, I assumed. Then she said the words that would change everything. You've provided enough to prompt an immediate internal audit. Don't resign. Don't acknowledge the letter. Let us move first. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. My pulse was racing, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline. At 3:17 ping, I walked past the glass conference room and saw Tina prepping name cards for a transition briefing. My name wasn't among them. I'd been written off already. In their eyes, I was done. Good. Because they weren't prepared for what would happen next. Friday morning arrived grey and still. I wore my most ordinary outfit, a charcoal sweater and pressed navy pants. No flair, no message, just steady hands and clear eyes. I arrived 10 minutes early. My badge still worked. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Jonas called a full staff meeting in the town hall space. He stood in front of a wide LED screen with a polished PowerPoint behind him titled Helix or 2.0. Rebuilding for the future. He launched into his usual cadence vision, synergy, next-gen optimization. Then the room shifted. George walked in, not quietly this time, not fading into the wallpaper. He was flanked by 2 people I didn't recognize. One in a sharp blue suit, the other with a legal pad and an expression that didn't blink. George raised his hand. Jonas stopped speaking mid-slide. I'm sorry to interrupt, George said calmly, but we've initiated a formal investigation into patterns of discrimination, unethical dismissal practices, and data manipulation within this leadership team. A ripple of confusion moved across the room. Jonas stammered. I wasn't made aware of. The woman in the suit stepped forward. We have evidence provided by multiple parties, including audio recordings, internal metrics, and source documents, effective immediately. The following individuals are placed on administrative leave pending outcome of the audit. She read names: Jonas Keane, Tina Mullins, 2 department heads I'd never interacted with. HR gasped. Someone dropped a coffee mug. George turned to me. Danica, will you please join us for the next portion of this meeting? I stood slowly, aware of every pair of eyes locked on me. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't smiling. I was breathing again. Pauline was standing near the back of the room. Our eyes met. She didn't say anything, but her expression said it all. She knew. They walked Jonas out at 10:12 a.m. No applause. No fanfare, just the quiet shuffling of someone who thought he was untouchable until he wasn't. I followed George into the executive conference room, where a long table had been set with water bottles, notepads, and a stack of folders titled Cultural Integrity Committee. Initial hearing. The air was cool, focused, serious. I sat at the table, this time, not as a spectator, not as collateral, as a witness, and a catalyst. You're not being let go, Ms. Greer. In fact, we'd like to talk to you about a new role, culture advisor. I never wanted power. I just wanted decency back in the place I called my second home. 3 weeks after the audit, Helixer Tech was a different place, not unrecognizably so. It hadn't flipped overnight into utopia, but it had softened. You could feel it in the way people walked through the halls, in how they greeted each other without the weight of performance, how laughter returned, not because a Slack bot prompted it, but because people were starting to feel safe again. It was Friday morning, the kind that used to mean forced dancing and cupcakes with brand colors. Now it meant something quieter, fresh coffee brewing early, an impromptu huddle over someone's birthday muffins, a coworker dropping off a note that simply said, "Thanks for helping me get through this week." My name was no longer missing from directories, no longer a floating tag next to the break room fridge. It now sat in black letters across the glass of a corner office door on the 3rd floor. Danica Greer, Senior Culture Advisor. I had never asked for it. When George and the external legal team offered the title, I was stunned. I didn't want a crown, a headline, or a seat of power. What I wanted was a place where voices like Pauline's were not just heard, but encouraged, where people like Jerry and Martha weren't cast aside with buzzwords and strategy decks. But I took the role not to climb, but to guard. And so, I moved into the very space Jonas once used as his fortress, his kingdom, the place where I had once been summoned and told, with a smile, that I no longer belonged. I kept the windows, but swapped out the fake fiddle leaf fig for a real plant from the old HR lounge, one I'd rescued when they emptied out the department. I donated his white marble desk to the common area and replaced it with a simple wooden one that had been in storage since 2010. I hung photos not of metrics and milestones, but of people, real moments, retirement parties, volunteer days, the first time we ever hosted a lunch and learn without a script. Behind my chair, I pinned up a quote my late husband once wrote on the back of a grocery list: "Do good work quietly and let your dignity make the noise." Pauline now worked 2 offices down. She'd been promoted to Employee Wellbeing Lead, a title we created together. She started a walk and talk program for mental health check-ins. Nothing mandatory, no surveys, just walking shoes and honest conversation. At first, only 3 people showed up. Last week, there were 20. We still spoke every day. She never once tried to thank me in grand ways. But once, she left a note on my keyboard that simply said, "You stood up, so now I can stand." 2. George had formally stepped into a chairman role part-time but present. He often stopped by with a thermos of tea and questions like, "Have we remembered to listen this week?" His style hadn't changed. Still quiet, still wearing shoes that made no sound on the tile. But now, people leaned in when he entered a room. One Friday afternoon, a familiar envelope appeared on my desk. Heavy paper, handwritten name. Inside was a brass key on a ring, and a short note in George's spidery script. "Danica, the library still has a light switch in the back. You said once we shouldn't forget our roots. Go flip it back on." I knew what it meant. The old Helixor Resource Library. The one we stopped using after the digital overhaul. It was dusty, windowless, and mostly forgotten. That evening, I walked down the back stairwell, key in hand, and opened the metal door at the end of the hall. The scent of old manuals and dried-out paper filled the air. There were stacks of binders, policy drafts, and team photos from 15 years ago. A small cork board still had a gratitude wall title half peeled across the top. I flicked the light switch. A soft hum, a warm glow. It wasn't a grand gesture. No one saw it, no cameras, no announcements. But in that moment, I knew this was what healing looked like. Not loud, not viral, just steady restoration. Back upstairs, the break room had been transformed. 2. No more ring lights or shout-out boards. Instead, people posted index cards with stories. Martha brought soup when I was sick. Tom fixed the printer without being asked. Pauline walked with me on my worst day. The wall had been renamed. Real culture, real people. At 4:58 p.m., I stood by my office window and watched the golden hour stretch across the skyline. Employees filtered out slowly, chatting in 2s and 3s, pausing to hold doors, to wave goodbye without obligation. And then I saw something that caught my breath. A new hire, someone I hadn't met yet, stopped by the security guard's desk. She handed him a coffee and said, "I hear you're the best part of the building." That's how I knew we were on the right path. I turned back to my desk, where a folder sat open with next week's agenda. We were launching a new mentorship program, intergenerational pairing, no flashy rollout, just one person helping another find their footing. And me, I wasn't done, not by a long shot, because I knew the most dangerous thing about toxic culture wasn't its volume, it was its silence. And now that I had a voice again, I planned to use it not to shout, but to make sure no one else ever had to whisper for help. I looked out from the corner office, remembering the woman they tried to erase, and realized I hadn't just survived their system. I had rewritten it, quietly, from the inside out. Sometimes, the smallest voice in the office is the one that sees everything. Danica never raised her tone. She didn't fight back with force. She listened, took notes, gathered truth and waited. In a workplace obsessed with appearances, she proved that substance still matters. Culture isn't loud, flashy, or trending. It's what you protect when no one's watching. And in the end, the woman they overlooked became the one who restored what really mattered: dignity, fairness, and trust.